This is the first in a new series of presentations on reflections on passages in Savitri. So the topic today is, what is fate? This presentation will consider Sri Aurobindo's views on the nature of fate as revealed in a significant passage in Savitri from the canto, The Way of Fate and the Problem of Pain. It is a perplexing question that mankind has grappled with for thousands of years, an elusive and complex philosophical problem which has crucial implications for our view of life and our navigation through its trials, tragedies, and joys. Here, Sri Aurobindo explicates the issues involved in this question of what is fate in subtle and revealing poetry, while reflecting on the significance of the mantric lines. The presentation will also draw on passages from other writings that help to draw out their implications. The passage under consideration comes on page 458 and 459 in the context of Savitri's return to the palace of her father, King Aswapati, and her mother, the queen, after meeting and choosing Satyavan as her spouse. Narad, the heavenly sage, is there at the time, and after Savitri reveals her choice, he reveals that Satyavan is destined to die in exactly 1 year. There then ensues a dialogue about fate and destiny, and the passage we will examine is a small but central and exalted part of Narad's explanation of this phenomenon that runs 56 lines. It can also be viewed as Sri Aurobindo's own viewpoint on the subject. I will break it into 5 segments, commenting on each in turn. It begins. Fate is truth working out in ignorance. O King, thy fate is a transaction done at every hour between nature and thy soul, with God for its foreseeing arbiter. Fate is a balance drawn in destiny's book. Man can accept his fate, he can refuse. Even if the one maintains the unseen decree, he writes thy refusal in thy credit page, for doom is not a close, a mystic seal. It's a powerful statement, but complex and subtle in its thought. Let's begin with the first line. Fate is truth working out in ignorance. This seems to suggest first that there is such a thing as fate, a kind of predestined condition of things and course of events in the world. Second, it suggests that fate is a certain truth of things that is gradually being revealed over time, or rather, worked out over time, in or under the conditions of ignorance. The distinction I am making between revealed and worked out is meant to draw a line between the idea of revealed, which suggests that fate is fixed or static and simply behind a curtain that is being removed, and the idea of worked out, which implies that fate may be more malleable, plastic, or living, that it may be at least partially in the process of being formed in this ignorance under its particular conditions, and that its unfolding is occurring within a play of forces, favorable and unfavorable, worked out rather than revealed. The term in ignorance implies that we who live in this ignorance are undergoing this fate and its consequences and can see neither the truth that is being gradually worked out nor the course of its unfolding over time. Whereas there is or may be a state of knowledge where these things are known, We are not in that state, and therefore we feel we are being subjected to a process of unfolding that we can neither understand nor control. Truth working out in ignorance also seems to suggest that this ignorance in which things are being worked out is itself the truth in an unfinished state of unfolding. This is a more profound idea which relates to the philosophical duality of being and becoming, a kind of static condition of being, the reality of what is, perhaps its essential truth, and a dynamic, more outward and fluid condition of becoming, in which the being is in a condition of flexibly becoming in space and time, or realizing what it is in its essential reality. Sri Aurobindo describes it this way: the absolute manifests itself in two terms, a being and a becoming. The being is the fundamental reality. The becoming is an effectual reality. It is a dynamic power and result, a creative energy and working out of the being, a constantly persistent yet mutable form, process, outcome of its immutable, formless essence. Becoming can only know itself wholly when it knows itself as being. The soul in the becoming arrives at self-knowledge and immortality when it knows the supreme and absolute and possesses the nature of the infinite and eternal. To do that is the supreme aim of our existence, for that is the truth of our being and must therefore be the inherent aim, the necessary outcome of our becoming. The next sentence, consisting of 3 lines, presents again a juxtaposition of 2 different statuses of being and becoming. To repeat the lines: O King, thy fate is a transaction done at every hour between nature and thy soul, with God for its foreseeing arbiter. It first describes a dynamic status of becoming that is being worked out as a transaction at every hour between nature and the soul. And then it describes an overseeing status of God, who is the foreseeing arbiter of this transaction. An arbiter is like a judge, one who is empowered to decide matters of disagreement or dispute between 2 parties. But God is a foreseeing arbiter, which suggests he knows what is unfolding in the course of these transactions in the becoming. In the dynamic status of becoming, fate is stated to be a transaction that is going on at every hour between nature and the soul. Here is another kind of duality in which the former duality, that of being and becoming, is kind of reproduced in the terms of the becoming. Within the becoming, there is a soul which represents the being in the conditions of the becoming. Our soul is a representative of the being of God here in the ignorance. Our soul is in a moment-to-moment transaction with nature, a transaction which is being adjudicated by God, who has the final authority over any disputes. The soul, being a representative of the being here in the becoming, is the truth of our individual being, which is gradually being worked out by our nature over time. This bifurcation between the soul and nature, in the conditions of the becoming, in the ignorance, is crucial to the conception of fate that Sri Aurobindo is describing, which will be elaborated in the lines that follow. This is because the soul is a kind of representative of God within each individual being, the being that is being worked out by nature over time. In effect, the soul has a precedence over nature, a command over nature, because it is the soul's truth that is being worked out over time by its nature. Or put another way, it is nature's role to become the truth of the soul. That is what our nature is, the gradual becoming over time of the truth of our soul. Further, there is a continual transaction taking place between the soul and nature. We could say that the soul is guiding or steering the nature in its activity and moving it in the direction of this working out of its truth. The nature is ignorant, something like a complex machine or automobile, and left to its own processes, it would move ignorantly this way and that. But behind it, there is a soul that is steering it towards a particular destination through the winding, crowded, and dirty streets of universal nature. The crucial question becomes, who has the upper hand in this driving? The conscious soul, who is trying to steer the car, or the wayward, mechanical meanderings of the ignorant nature? This is the transaction that is being worked out moment to moment in our lives. Will we follow our soul, or will we follow our nature's ignorant movements? The idea of God being the arbiter suggests that the divine being is watching over the evolutionary progress of each individual soul in its moment-to-moment transactions with its nature. After all, the soul is the representative of God in the ignorant nature, so it is but natural that God should oversee the soul's progress in steering the nature to its intended destination. The significance of the transactions which determine the direction the car moves at any given moment, as well as their arbitration, is elaborated in the lines that follow. First, let us consider the significant line, "Fate is a balance drawn in destiny's book." Here Narad makes a subtle distinction between fate and destiny. Suggests that fate is more like the present conditions in which the individual is stationed. Our fate may be to live in favorable or unfavorable conditions, to be rich or poor, to have a pleasant life or a wretched one, to have a developed mind, life, and body, or an undeveloped one. It suggests that destiny, in contrast, is more akin to the goal to which the course of our evolution is headed. Destiny is the destination. Fate is our present location on the journey. Narad earlier has said that fate is a transaction done at every hour. There is therefore a new balance that is drawn after each transaction between the soul and nature. The more we follow the soul, the higher our balance in destiny's book. Or in the terms of our other metaphor, the more we follow our soul, the more precisely our lives are steered towards our soul's destination, and the sooner we will arrive, that is, to our soul's truth, to our true being, and to God. Next, there is the striking sentence, "Man can accept his fate, he can refuse." This goes back to the distinction made earlier about fate being the working out of truth in the ignorance versus it being the revealing of truth over time. This line strongly emphasizes the former interpretation And this more dynamic view of fate was also supported by the idea of fate being a transaction done at every hour between the soul and nature. But here the sage says we can refuse our fate, that is, our present status, position, and direction in our evolutionary journey. It is the soul in us who accepts or refuses our fate, the representative of God in our humanity. Nature is the soul's becoming over time, and the soul is the driver of the process. It can step on the brake, turn the car around, and step on the accelerator. Whereas we are where we are on the evolutionary path, we can decide to move off our present location and go elsewhere. We are not compelled to continue circling round nature's cul-de-sacs. We can turn onto a different road that leads directly to our destination. And we can drive fast or slow. The final 3 lines harken back to the notion that God is the arbiter of the transaction done between the soul and nature. To repeat, even if the one maintains the unseen decree, he writes thy refusal in thy credit page, for doom is not a close, a mystic seal. If the soul refuses its fate, its present conditions and apparent future course, it can, or at least it can try, to alter these. If the momentum of nature is too much for it, the balance of its karma too adverse, its accumulated debts too high to wipe away in a single stroke, God, the arbiter, will nevertheless take note of the soul's refusal. Its very attempt to refuse will go onto the credit side of the ledger of its transactions with nature and will certainly help its future fate, if not immediately in the present. It essentially suggests that every effort we make in support of our soul's evolution, even though it may presently fail to attain its objective, is still helpful for our spiritual progress and leaves its mark. The next part of the passage reads as follows: Arisen from the tragic crash of life, arisen from the body's torture and death, the spirit rises, mightier by defeat. Its godlike wings grow wider with each fall. Its splendid failures sum to victory. O man, the events that meet thee on thy road, though they smite thy body and soul with joy and grief, are not thy fate. They touch thee a while and pass. Even death can cut not short thy spirit's walk. Thy goal, the road thou choosest, are thy fate. The first 2 sentences, while affirming the benefits of our soul-directed efforts, even though they may fail in their immediate aims, expands on this idea in a dramatic way. But to understand this better, it may be useful to note that the soul, the divine representative of God within us, has accepted to enter into this ignorant world, which at its base is inconscient, to gradually evolve here in this adverse environment through many lives in order to transform its ignorance and suffering into a divine life. Though the soul itself is immortal, through this long evolutionary process, it identifies with its evolving physical, vital, and mental instruments of nature, in which it embodies itself on earth. its divine strength, wisdom, and delight support the outer nature from its hidden seat deep within the heart center, but it shares in their ordeals and the difficulties of their slow growth. Here, the poet amplifies those ordeals for us so we feel them. The tragic crash of life, the body's torture and death, defeat, fall. Through all these adversities, which every soul that assumes a body in this world faces, the soul rises and grows mightier. Its wings grow wider, enabling it to soar higher. Why? I can think of 3 reasons. The first is that the soul supports the outer personality of nature through these ordeals. So the soul grows stronger through the exercise of this supportive action. And the greater the difficulty, the more weight it must lift. A second reason is that when we in our outer nature face ordeals, we are more likely to turn within towards our soul and the divine. The third reason is suggested by another powerful sentence in Savitri that comes on page 443. Pain is the hammer of the gods to break a dead resistance in the mortal's heart, his slow inertia as of living stone. Pain, adversity, and suffering are God's tools for molding matter and human beings into more vibrant and responsive vehicles for his manifestation. Through our ordeals, our nature is being kneaded, transformed into a more refined and evolved form. In simple terms, we learn and grow fastest through our errors and sufferings. In the end, they add up to victory. The next sentence in the remainder of this part of the passage builds on the first part to reiterate the lines. O man, the events that meet thee on thy road, though they smite thy body and soul with joy and grief, are not thy fate. They touch thee a while and pass. Even death can cut not short thy spirit's walk. Thy goal, the road thou choosest, are thy fate. Narad says that these ordeals that we face in life are not really our fate. They are just passing incidents in the growth and evolution of our soul. Even what seems to be the most adverse fate, an early death, as in the case of Satyavan, does not stop our soul's progress. Indeed, like our struggles and sufferings, death may even help the soul in its growth. Here we may note that the very threat of death, our very mortality, our knowledge that our days are numbered, may be one of the most powerful spurs to our spiritual growth. It drives us to concentrate ourselves on what is important, on what we would like to achieve in our life. At the same time, it impels us to find the meaning of life. It presents us with its looming finality, the mystery of our existence. A mystery which propels us inward towards the immortal element within us, our soul. And in a more practical way, death enables us to end one chapter of our spiritual evolution so that we may begin a new chapter in the next life. But it is the last line that is most pregnant with significance. Thy goal, the road thou choosest, are thy fate. What the sage seems to imply here is that our fate is not the immediate circumstances of our life, but rather the direction of our movement and the goal towards which we are aiming. It is as if he were looking down at life from some higher altitude. At the ground level, we only see the immediate environment. But if we look at ourselves from high above, we would see the topography of the surrounding area, the direction in which we are headed, the terrain of the path ahead, and the beauty of our destination. Looking from above, we would not be distracted by the details of our present location, but would see our life and fate in the wider perspective of its position on the map of our spiritual journey's route. The next part of the passage reads as follows. On the altar, throwing thy thoughts, thy heart, thy works, thy fate is a long sacrifice to the gods, till they have opened to thee thy secret self, and made thee one with the indwelling God. O soul, intruder in nature's ignorance, armed traveler to the unseen supernal heights, thy spirit's fate is a battle and ceaseless march against invisible opponent powers, a passage from matter into timeless self. Adventurer through blind, unforeseeing time, a forced advance through a long line of lives. It pushes its spearhead through the centuries. Here, Sri Aurobindo presents a more inward, mystical significance of our fate, that it is a long sacrifice to the gods we make until they open to us our inner self and make us one with the divine that dwells within us. This sacrifice is, for most of our long spiritual journey, an unconscious one. Our thoughts, emotions, and actions are at first offered to the various disguises of the divine, to our friends, lovers, employers, to money, power, pleasure, as a duty to family, community, country, humanity, earth, to ideals, moral, social, intellectual, religious, spiritual. At long last, we recognize that behind all these appearances stands the one God, and that he has been accepting our sacrifice through these appearances of his and gradually leading us through all his disguises to himself. Then we offer ourselves consciously, lovingly, and gratefully to him. It is only when we make this last conscious sacrifice complete, offering all our thoughts, emotions, actions, and self to him directly, that the doors open to the indwelling God, to our secret soul. The next lines image fate as a battle and ceaseless march against invisible opponent powers, a passage from matter into timeless self. This is an image Sri Aurobindo will expand upon in the next portion of the passage, but these lines suggest that this ceaseless march is the long evolutionary journey of the soul through a long line of lives, from its immersion in inert matter to its realization of the spirit in the saint or yogi. But here I would like to reflect on these invisible opponent powers. Of course, the main theme of the poem is Savitri's battle with these opponent powers, figured most pointedly in the god of death, whom she pursues as he takes the soul of Satyavan into his shadowy realms. So the god of death is one of these opponent powers, and in the poem seems to represent them in general. But Sri Aurobindo and the mother have spoken and written about 4 primary adverse powers: inconscience or darkness, falsehood, suffering, and death. Sri Aurobindo writes this about them: the hostile forces are powers of darkness who are in revolt against the light and the truth and want to keep this world under their rule in darkness and ignorance. Whenever anyone wants to reach the truth, to realize the divine, they stand in the way as much as possible. But what they are especially against is the work the mother and myself are doing to bring down the light here into the earth and establish the truth. That would mean their own expulsion. So they always try to destroy the work as a whole and to spoil the sadhana of each sadhak. The only way to avoid it is to be entirely turned towards the mother and to refuse any opportunity to these forces. Regarding the Lord of falsehood, the mother has said, at times he calls himself the Lord of nations. It is he who sets all wars in motion, and only by thwarting his plans could the last war, that is World War II, be won. She also said, it is also perfectly sure that very soon his hour will come and all will be over for him, that he will have to disappear. And he absolutely refuses to change. He has no intention to do it, for immediately he will lose all his power. It is impossible. And he knows that he will disappear. But he proclaims categorically that before disappearing, he will do all that lies in his power to destroy, demolish, ruin, corrupt all he can. That is certain. Afterwards, it is the downfall. He accepts the downfall on this condition. Let us continue with the next part of the passage, which expands on the image of fate as a battle and ceaseless march. Across the dust and mire of the earthly plain, on many guarded lines and dangerous fronts, in dire assaults, in wounded slow retreats, holding the ideal's ringed and battered fort, or fighting against odds in lonely posts, or camped in night around the bivouac's fires, awaiting the tardy trumpets of the dawn, in hunger and in plenty and in pain, through peril and through triumph and through fall, through life's green lanes and over her desert sands, up the bald moor, along the sunlit ridge, in serried columns with a straggling rear, led by its nomad vanguard signal fires, marches the army of the way-lost God. This part of the passage is striking for its poetic style, especially the use of rich imagery, but also the agreement between its rhythm and its content. We note that it is a single long sentence, but punctuated with frequent commas which help convey the sense of a long, difficult march of an army battalion at war. We see and feel quite vividly the soldier's plight in various settings and scenarios. The passage, in one sense, is a metaphor for the soul's difficult evolutionary journey through many lives. But the fact is that for many human lives, the experiences described here really are part of the soul's journey, for war has been a prominent and constant part of Earth's human evolution. Sri Aurobindo shows a remarkable sensitivity and appreciation for these human experiences. And though he himself never served in the armed forces, he lived through the 2 world wars. And in his inner cosmic consciousness, he was intimately aware of all that was happening, while at the same time putting his occult force behind the Allied forces, especially during the Second World War. Some of these occult interventions are described in von Vreckham's biography, The Mother, the Story of Her Life. But here Sri Aurobindo is describing in personal terms the experiences of individual soldiers. Another aspect of Sri Aurobindo's involvement with the Second World War was his actual occult presence on the battlefield. This has been related by an American infantryman, John Kelly, who had frequent vivid visions of Sri Aurobindo, and sometimes of the Mother, so vivid that they conversed, and some in which Sri Aurobindo told him which way to run to save himself. These experiences are related in a book called Great Sir and Heavenly Lady by Maggie Licci Grassi, as well as in the book Antithesis of Yoga by Aurovillian Jocelyn. I myself met John Kelly in 1984, and he related the story to me in person. Here are some extracts about his first encounter with Sri Aurobindo on the battlefield that he related in an interview with Gordon Korstange, which was published in Collaboration, an American journal on Sri Aurobindo's yoga, in 1984. He says, "We were in a zigzag trench down this mountain, which was a graveyard from the First World War. I had heard that from the Napoleonic Wars there were people buried there. There were crosses. We were near a wood road up in the forest. The original company had been wiped out almost to a man, as far as I know. There were German and American bodies lying on the field amid the pine trees. It was a big jungle of torn up trees and earth. After some time, 1 day, 2 days, God knows, it was freezing up there, the middle of winter. Time stood still. Finally, one night, late, there was nobody near me. I saw a wisp of white smoke in front of me, a little whiff of smoke, like cigarette smoke. Little sparks of light started to emanate out of that little wisp. It was moving to my right from no man's land. My eyes were fastened on it like a rabbit's. The smoke kept growing and turned into a haze, and the sparks coming out of it were enormous. My mind was working feverishly, very rapid, so out of that came a bubbling laughter, gentle laughter of a wise old man. It came out like champagne, and actually I heard the pip of a bottle and the fizz. That effervescent sound with the light in front of me became a delightful fascination and frightening. The laughter kept getting louder, in my head perhaps, I don't know. But it was very gentle and very wise. And suddenly I see a mouth and a beard start to form, then the eyes, and the eyes sent out this light that hit me, and I fell back in the hole. I said, "Oh God, I think I struck pay dirt here." The laughter was one of the most incredible things of tone value I have ever heard. What I felt was that the laughter itself was talking to me. Now, you see, there is such a thing as mocking laughter, hilarious laughter. You can laugh every way. You can laugh, for all kinds of reasons. There's a whole vocabulary of laughter that I became attuned to, and the nuances of the laughter. But then I looked up, and standing there in front of me on the battlefield was the full figure, a man with a white beard and white hair hanging down in a sheet like a Roman emperor. He's leaning against this tree a little bit, and he's signing to my left. I don't know if the moon was out that night, but the light on his face was golden. You could see a certain kind of refinement in this being that was extraordinary, and aesthetic face that really doesn't show up in his photographs at all. There was suffering and the conquering of suffering. All of that was there. Anyway, the contact was constant. He was giving directions, and I was always refusing to accept them. And he was like a periscope. He could look around. He could see in the distance where it was safe and where we should go. That was very beneficial to me. But still, you can have your father take you by the hand and lead you into the candy store, and you're still going to be disgruntled. I was disgruntled, though I was in a very advantageous position with having such a guide. Still, the gloom. At least I had somebody to complain to. So you can read the entire article and see some related photos at the collaboration website, collaboration.org. Look for the tab for journal issues. This issue is 1984, volume 10, number 2. We now come to the concluding part of the passage, which also describes the concluding part of the passage from matter into timeless self. Then late the joy ineffable is felt. Then he remembers his forgotten self. He has refound the skies from which he fell. At length his front's indomitable line forces the last passes of the ignorance, advancing beyond nature's last known bounds, reconnoitering the formidable unknown, beyond the landmarks of things visible. It mounts through a miraculous upper air, till climbing the mute summit of the world, he stands upon the splendor peaks of God. Sri Aurobindo says, then late the joy ineffable is felt. This word late carries a lot of poignant significance. It carries with it reverberations of that battle and ceaseless march and that forced advance through a long line of lives. One of the striking things about Sri Aurobindo's vision and writings is the extraordinarily wide perspective he brings to life. It is like John Kelly said, and he was like a periscope. He could look around. He could see in the distance where it was safe and where we should go. In this line, the word late reminds us of where we have come from. And then he shows us where we are going, to the joy ineffable. But that ineffable joy doesn't come early, it comes late. There are many lives of toil and battle and suffering, and then when the sacrifice enters the conscious phase, there is the long course of sadhana. Even then, there is a long period of preparation of the mental, vital, and physical nature, the reorienting of all one's energies, aims, aspirations, efforts, desires, activities, away from the satisfaction of one's ego to a sacred offering to the divine. This cannot be done in a day. The mother once said, in almost all cases, a very, very sustained effort is needed to become aware of one's psychic being. Usually it is considered that if one can do it in 30 years, one is very lucky. 30 years of sustained effort, I say. It may happen that it's quicker, but this is so rare that immediately one says, this is not an ordinary human being. That's the case of people who have been considered more or less divine beings and who were great yogis, great initiates. Perhaps now that the supramental consciousness is at work in the earth atmosphere and the divine help is more powerful, the time may be shortened. But the process of purification and reorienting of the nature still must take place. And Sri Aurobindo says it depends in the beginning and for a long time on the personal effort of the sadhaka. And then the joy ineffable is felt. The phrase is so simple and so deep. The joy is so incredible it cannot be described or expressed. It is like that language of laughter spoken of by John Kelly. In the record of yoga, Sri Aurobindo's yogic diary, he writes of the various types of ananda that he was experiencing and working to establish in his consciousness. In the glossary to the record of yoga, which is available online, there are defined many forms of ananda. The divine bliss can be experienced in all the different planes and parts of the being and nature in different ways and different intensities. Here are a few examples. Anandamayi Leela, the world as a rapturous game of the Anandamayi Ishwara. Shama Ananda, Ananda filled with peace, calm, delight. Hasyamaya Ananda, delight full of laughter. Ananda Vani, beatific voice. Sharir Ananda, also called physical Ananda, the total physical delight experienced when spiritual Ananda can flow into the body and inundate cell and tissue. Life often doesn't feel so wonderful and delightful to us because our mental vision of life breaks it up into fragments which we take as wholes existing in an adverse or indifferent environment. But when we see and know the divine in each being and thing, when we see that the universe is an endless masquerade, as Sri Aurobindo describes it elsewhere in Savitri, when we see all that is and happens as the divine, feel ourselves surrounded and pervaded by the divine, our experience changes into one of unspeakable delight. The next lines, then he remembers his forgotten self. He has refound the skies from which he fell. Remind us that the world of bliss is our home. Our life here in this world of pain and suffering is a journey our soul has taken into the night to reclaim it and bring it back to the light of the divine. This is our adventure and our battle. When we enter into the world of ignorance through the gates of birth, we forget our home. But between each earthly life, we do go back to a world of divine delight, the psychic world, to rejuvenate and to further map out our continuing evolutionary journey on earth. And finally, after reaching a very high level of development on earth, we are able to push through the bounds of the ignorance into the infinite, into the unknown. There, our souls mount through a miraculous upper air. This seems to be the regions of the spiritual mind consciousness above the intellectual mind and towering up towards the supermind. Earth's physical atmosphere consists of 5 layers: the troposphere, which is the normal sky we see, and above it, the stratosphere, the mesosphere, the thermosphere, and the exosphere. Similarly, above our human mind, there are 4 higher layers of spiritual mind: the higher mind, the illumined mind, the intuition, and the overmind. Even overmind is a very high part of the mind, and beyond it lies the supramental consciousness, which is not mind at all, but a different kind of consciousness with a different substance. In the ascent towards the supramental consciousness, we mount through these higher layers of spiritual mind. They are not abstract and analytical like the intellectual mind, but miraculous, full of lights, colors, rushes of force and ecstasy, and a powerful will and activity for realization and transformation. Eventually, we will reach the summits, the splendor peaks of God, from where we will look out over the entire creation, see it in one grand view. Not only will we see it as if removed from it in the far distance, but we will become it. We will enter into its very substance, know it as we know ourselves. We will attain the vision of God Himself, the divine being who is above all, but who also is all. And we will participate in His wonderful and various delight of infinite conscious being. Thank you.